Welcome to another week's episode of the masterclass that we have here. Our special guest today is Matt Barre, and he comes all the way from the UK, because that rhymes. And he lives in Tucson, Arizona, an awesome agent that has done wonderful things. He can talk on lots of different topics, but today the topic that we're going to be discussing are podcasts, 'cause that's what he's just got into. And so he's going to share. Doing podcasts is obviously a million different ways of doing it, but this is going to be one of the things that he's going to talk about and the way he's done it and the way he's transitioning. I think you're transitioning of how you're doing it. So hopefully you guys all understand. And my limiting belief is when I have a podcast that no one's going to listen or no one's going to hear it. And that rightfully could be true for the first little bit. And I think podcasts are very similar to YouTube in the sense that they are something that, you put out this content, and unlike social media channels that just kind of, you put the content out and it goes away. I think podcasts have a shelf life, which I think is a remarkable way to be able to make connections and connect with people. Matt, go ahead and take it from there.
Well, guys, thank you for taking some time out of your morning to be with me, to be present, and to learn and discuss podcasting. As Nazar said, 6 months ago, I was given an idea by a friend of mine. In fact, I actually put the idea out to two friends of mine. I wanted to do something that was bigger than me, that provided value to people, but I didn't know what it was about. And so a very good friend of mine, he mentioned I should start a podcast. And I'll be honest with you guys, right from the get-go, I was like, screw that. I'm not doing another real estate podcast. There's a million out there. Like, nobody needs to hear another podcast about real estate. And he gave me a different spin and he gave me a different idea. And I started a podcast about completely something different. So before we go down the road and before we start digging into this, just out of curiosity, raise of hands, I know we've got people in different positions, but who here has had a thought about or is looking to start a podcast? All right, so you've got about 5 or 6 people, which is fantastic. I want you to write a couple of questions down and again take notes as we're going through this. But one of the things that when I thought about starting this podcast, and my podcast, guys, is actually about parenting. It's the furthest thing from the truth about real estate. It's got nothing to do with real estate. It's actually all about parenting and family. And the idea was given to me because I'm a stepfather of 2 daughters, 11 and 13. I've been in their life since I was 3 and 1. And my friend saw that my superpower was being a stepdad. And he wanted me to share that message with other people, other step parents that may be struggling, or to have people on to talk about these sort of things. So it's not even real estate related, guys. And it's crazy how from not talking about real estate and providing value outside the world of real estate, it's actually brought me business and connections in the world of real estate. It's a really, really crazy symbiotic universe that people connect with you about parenting or people connect with you about vulnerabilities and trauma, and they have that connection with you, and it just so happens to be you're a realtor, then you're their preferred realtor. They've already built the know, like, and trust because they know, like, and trust you from your podcast, and it merges into business. So a couple of things I want you to write down for those who raise their hand about wanting to start a podcast. Write these questions down. Why do you want to start a podcast? Who's it for? Is it for you? Is it for delivering value to other people? Who is it really for? They say on average, if they have about 400 hours of your voice recorded, they can AI the shit out of you for life and put you into any conversation that you don't want to be in. So for me, when I started this, I wanted to bring value to others, but I also wanted to leave a legacy piece for my kids. I wanted to have something that in 10, 15, 20 years' time, my kids could listen back on and be like, those were my dad's friends. Those were the struggles my dad was having. Those are the challenges my dad had being a step parent that I never knew about. But man, it's really cool to hear how he came through that and got through that and is the amazing parent he is today. So I wanted it to be a legacy piece, but I also wanted to bring value to people as well. So write down, why do you want to start your podcast? You also want to write down, who is your audience going to be? Are you going to be hyper local? So you're going to be doing a podcast about real estate just for your city of Atlanta, or for your city of Chicago, or for your city of St. George? Or are you looking to do this for your state? Are you looking to do this nationally? Be really clear and identify who you want your audience to be. Because if you're talking about things on a national level, you're going to lose the people locally, and vice versa. So really kind of figure out who you want your audience to be. Also, figure out how often do you want to record and release this podcast. Do you want this to be once a week, bi-weekly, once a month? Do you like 2 to 3 times a week? Realistically, how often do you want to release this podcast? Because that comes down to a big piece of how much you have to commit to making a podcast. And then the other thing to think about too is how and where are you going to do it? Are you going to set up a studio at home and buy all of the equipment? Are you going to look for places that rent a studio in a city near you where you can just plug and play, record, and take the file home with you afterwards? Or are there facilities in your city that, like I do with mine, where they record you, they edit you, and they post for you, and all I have to do is literally show up, talk, and leave? So there's multiple options in how do we get into podcasting and how do you best benefit you. There are also ways too that if you have an extra office at your, at the Fiv office, could you build a podcast studio there and rent it out to agents and make money off of it? There's lots of options when you get into this podcasting world. So when I started looking to do a podcast, a very good friend of mine who's a Utah-based realtor by the name of Jimmy Rex, he has a very successful podcast, over 400 plus episodes. He's done podcasts with the Bishop of the Mormon Church. He's done podcasts with Omar Jackson. He's done a lot of podcasts with a lot of famous people. And I asked him when I first started about doing this podcast, and he asked me a really great question. He went, "What is your hourly rate?" And I looked at him, I was like, what the hell has that got to do with me running a podcast? He went, "I need you to figure out your hourly rate, because I need you to figure out how many hours are you going to dedicate to your podcast, because that's money you are not earning, because a podcast will not pay you your hourly rate." And I was like, oh shit. He goes, "So any money you spend on podcasting is just you putting money into the universe for you to do something for you." He goes, "Unless you blow up and you become the next Joe Rogan and they're paying you $1 million to move to Spotify, like, you're not going to make any money off this podcast." I was like, fair enough. So then I really had to figure out, I was like, do I really want to spend money doing this? Is the passion strong enough for me to do the project? And it really was. So I know that I'm not going to make any money off this podcast. I spend, honestly, anywhere between $1,200 to $1,400 a month producing my podcast. And I know I'm not going to get that money back. But the value that I've brought to people and the safe container that I've shared with people for them to share their story is honestly worth every single penny of it. So just something to consider is, how much is your hourly rate? How many hours is it going to cost you to create this podcast? And is it worth the ROI, knowing you're not going to get a cash return? So any questions as we're getting into this? And feel free, if you've got comments or you want to raise your hand and chat, please feel free to. You don't need to hear me rambling on for 45 minutes, so please be interactive.
So Matt, for those of us that say, we don't have this, altruistic, calling, if you will, towards whatever the reason is, to create a podcast. Like, if I just say I absolutely want to do it for the purpose of creating another lead pillar for real estate, what would you say? Would you say, well, then switch gears and make it about real estate? Or do you feel like there's a way in which we can link, the passion that we may have towards something? I know that there's an agent on my team who loves soccer. And so, like I believe he does have a soccer podcast. I don't know if it's active or not, but like, is there a way that we can link it to where we can still make it be a financial opportunity without, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's a great question, Azar. Thank you for that. And I've done a lot of research getting into these podcasts. I listened to episodes of Joe Rogan, just to kind of figure out, pacing and leading, and the way he leads people through the podcast and answering questions. So to come back to you, Nazar, is if you were to do a podcast about real estate, because that's your world and you want to use it as a lead pillar, it is super important that that podcast is not just about real estate, but it's about you too. So it's your passion about real estate, the things that excite you about real estate. You want to bring that excitement to the masses. You don't just want to sit in front of the camera or in front of the microphone and do a 30-minute podcast of you just telling people that this is what the interest rates are doing and this is what you expect is going to happen and this is what's going on in your area and how many homes have sold and how many people are just going to be like, screw this, I'm out. I'll find that on social media somewhere else. But if you tell them and you bring them on that journey, and a good friend of mine, Michael McHenry, he owns a lot of restaurants up in Salt Lake City. He always says to me that when he goes into a restaurant, he doesn't buy the steak because of how it looks. He buys the steak because of the sizzle. So you want to sell the sizzle. So if you're talking about real estate, you want to get excited about the opportunity that the new builds that they're building, the changes in the new builds, the upgrades that they're now making standard instead of a required cost. Bring those sort of energy into real estate and people will get engaged and come with you versus just hitting them with data. Make it personal to you. I think that's a really great way of blending the two together. If you've got an agent on your team who's passionate about soccer and that's his identity, then why doesn't he do the podcast with him wearing one jersey and give his guest another one to wear? It's a different delineation of like, oh, if I see a screenshot of two guys wearing soccer jerseys talking about real estate, I know it's his podcast. It's an immediate delineation of who he is and what his character is. So if you don't have a passion to talk about parenting or anything different, but you want to keep it real estate related, just make it very personal. So great question. Nazar, anybody else? Any other questions?
I just commented on that same thing though, but I listen to podcasts all the time and I love yours, Matt, by the way. But I find myself, I'll listen to a topic that I'm not even the slightest bit interested in, but I'm hooked because of the passion of the host, or that I can tell, like, I like that excitement that they have for something and it draws me in.
Yeah,
So,
it's infectious. It really is infectious. Now, you can listen to, you can listen to Joe Rogan and some of his guests, and they may be some left wing or right wing, or they may be on the opposite page to you, but you listen to them, and because the way Joe contours the podcast and the energy he brings, you actually listen through that podcast and go, huh, I've now got a different opinion of that person because of this podcast. It can actually change your mind about some things. So
RFK for president. So
there you go.
I think it's also interesting
crazy.
to realize is that, again, I don't mean to like think about this compared to YouTube, but just like YouTube, a podcast, no one jumps on a podcast to listen to for 2 minutes, right? When they go on there, they listen to the whole thing, unless it's just dumb and they're not interested. But for the most part, either whatever the reason is people will listen to the subject matter or the person or whatever it is, and you've got like a captive audience for the 20, 30, however many minutes the podcast goes. And there's massive value in being able to really get people to get to know you as a human being. And if you want to talk about real estate or any other business venture, people like doing business with people that they know, like, and trust. And what a great platform to be able to share what you're passionate about, and and have them say, hey, gosh, I really resonate with Matt. He seems like a genuinely good person, or whatever it is, I connect with him, and therefore when I think about real estate or whatever it is, there's that opportunity.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. You can fall in love, or you can enjoy an individual from their podcasts, and build, like you said, build a one-way rapport with them before you even ever meet them in person. Just from listening to them, they vibe with you. And like you said, you may not be in the business of buying a house, but when they come to, the first person they're going to think of is you, because of the rapport they already have with you. They feel like they know you. They come to them and introduce themselves like, I have no idea who you are, but they know everything about you. It's kind of a little weird. True fact, most podcasts don't get past 10 episodes. That is absolute true fact. Everybody thinks they want to start a podcast. The average is less than 10 episodes. There is a very, very few podcasts that get past 10 episodes. Everyone just jacks it in. And the reason is they think nobody's listening. Exactly to what Nzar said earlier. I'm putting the money into this. I'm creating this. I'm putting energy, time, and spirit into this. And I've got 4 people listening on Apple Podcasts. I've got 30 people listening on Spotify. I've had 4 views on YouTube. This sucks. I'm giving it up. I want to share with you a true story which happened to me probably 3 months after I'd started my podcast. I was like 12 episodes in, and I'm getting a good amount of listeners. My mom's listening, so that's great. She's committed. My wife listens. She's committed. My kids listen. So I got 4 listeners. I'm doing really well here. And I had a message from an old military buddy of mine. I left the military in 2000 in the UK, hadn't seen him since 2009, but we stayed in touch on Facebook, birthdays, messages, that kind of stuff. He sends me a message, he sends me a Facebook message, and he was like, mate, I absolutely love your podcast. How can I be a part of it? So I responded back. I was like, well, it's kind of not a good old boys podcast kind of thing, but like, what's your story? He said that his wife and he had gone through IVF 4 times. And on the 5th time, the last time they were going to give up, they were graced with twins. What a story. Now, this is a guy that I haven't seen since 2009. I've only spoke to on Facebook, but he listened and he reached out. So whether you think they're listening or whether you believe they are, they believe they're not, there are people listening out there that will incredibly surprise you that they've listened to what you have to say. I went to my doctor this Monday to go, my orthopedic surgeon. I haven't seen him since 2016. And the first thing he did when he walked into the examination room, he went, "Oh my God, we have a celebrity in the studio in the surgery today. I love your podcast." He's my surgeon. Haven't seen him since 2016. He's not even on my Christmas card list, but he listens to my podcast. So whether you think they're listening or whether you think they're not, that's all up here. Trust me, there are people listening that you've never met that will reach out to you or share with you the value that they bring. So stick with it. Next thing I have down here on my sheet is, if you're looking to build a podcast, build a plan. All right. We don't ever want to go into anything without a plan. So build a plan. When are you going to release it? What day, what time? Do your research. If you've got other agents in your area that have real estate podcasts, do the research of when they're releasing theirs, and don't do it at the same time. You want to find a window that is solely yours. So do your research. How do you want to market your podcast? Instagram stories, Instagram reels, Facebook stories, Facebook reels, YouTube shorts. Build a marketing plan for your podcast. One of the things I did right away was said, okay, I know that I'm going to have the same image every Wednesday morning to show that there's a new release. I'm going to have an image with my guests that I'll release, and then I'll release my YouTube or social media cover so it looks exactly the same as what they see on Instagram to what they see on YouTube. The covers are just the same. You want to be very clear that your branding across your podcast is exactly the same. So if your YouTube thumbnail is pink with green writing, you need the same pink and green writing on Instagram for your reels, your shorts, whatever. It has to be traceable. You don't want to get people lost in the ether of different colors, different imagery. So when do you want to release it? How do you want to market it? And then also start to write down who your guests going to be. If you're going to have guests on your podcast, it's actually really good to create a list of guests and start putting a bug in their ear about coming on your podcast. Before I even released my first episode, I had a list of 60 guests, people in Salt Lake City, people in Tucson that I wanted to interview for my podcast who I thought would be a great candidate for the show. So create that guest list. And with regards to your guests, start small. The worst mistake you can do is have a brand new podcast and think the greatest way I can get listeners straight away is to have like a Jimmy Rex or a Joe Rogan or a Dwayne Johnson on my podcast that's going to put me to the moon. They ain't interested. They won't show up. And you're going to have an empty seat and just you looking at an empty camera for about an hour. It's going to be really awkward. So go with local people. Go with your lenders. Go with your title reps. Go with your home warranty companies. Bring them in, have conversations, talk about the changes, talk about the benefits, bring value. Start with those lower league players who have smaller farms that will share, and then start to move up to the bigger players, maybe the senior loan officer of your local lending organization versus just the LO. Bring the bigger players in, and that'll start to elevate and then go even further. So for me, on my list of guests, I have my ultimate number one top list. Like, this is the one I'm aiming to have on my show, is Prince Harry. You think I may be completely batshit crazy. He's on my vision board. I'm having Prince Harry on my podcast. I know I am. There's going to be tequila. There's going to be probably nakedness. Whatever's going to happen, it happens. He's coming on my show. I also have people like Jimmy Rex on my list. I also have people like Drew Manning, the Fit to Fat to Fit from Utah. I have him on my list. I have a list of people that I know when I reach out to them, ask to be on my podcast, they're probably going to say, who the hell are you? But I'm going to keep asking anyway. So don't fear having big names on the list. Just start small and work your way up. Any questions so far? I know we're kind of blitzing through and I'm doing a lot of talking and you're doing a lot of attentive listening. So any questions?
In the comments we have, can you have a successful podcast without a killer accent?
What was that? Can you have sure, Matt, yes. And if you want, I can just audio dub it for you. It's no problem. It's no problem. Yeah, I don't think the accent makes a difference. Maybe it does, who knows? So here's a question for you to write down. What makes a good podcast? So that part of my research that I did was what makes a good podcast. So realistically, think about the podcasts you listen to. You know, whether you listen to Joe Rogan, whether you listen to Ed Milet, whether you just kind of like to listen to the Kelsey Brothers podcast, whatever it is. What's a podcast that you enjoy listening to that makes you tune in over and over and over again, regardless of the content? Have that be a basis of how you want to predominantly build yours. So I've listened to several podcasts where people have guests on, and the guests said about 40 to 50 words, and the host just carries the entire conversation. If you're going to have guests on your show, there's a reason why they're there. And there's a reason why they're guests. That's for you to ask questions and shut up and let them talk. I cannot tell you the amount of times I've listened to a podcast. I mean, really excited to hear who the guest was, and I never got anything out of it because the host just talked over the guest. So think about how you want to structure your podcast. Is it going to be you doing a single piece, a 10 to 15 minute podcast, informational? Is it going to be a guest, kind of easy chatting, cup of coffee kind of scenario? So really figure out how you want to build your podcast and what it looks like. And then with your guests, give them time to talk. One of the questions I have, which in my mind when I'm thinking about my guest list, is what's their story? The question I always ask myself is, what's the story the world needs to hear from my guest? If there isn't a compelling story, 9 times out of 10, I don't really want to interview them. It's not because I'm not interested, but you know, if you're a single dad with 2 kids working 2 jobs, there's millions of them and they're all doing pretty good. And if you're a single mom with 2 kids working 3 jobs, there's a million of you too. But if you're a single mom with 3 kids who has this and this and this and is doing this, this and this, like that's a story of empowerment. That's the kind of guest I want to talk to. I've had lots of my friends saying, hey, I want to come on the show and talk to you about how I, play football or soccer with my kids. I'm like, great. What's the story that the world needs to hear? Well, my kid can catch a football at the age of 4. Congratulations, move on, go on somebody else's podcast. So really think to yourself, what's the story that the world needs to hear from my guest? And if it's a real estate podcast, maybe the world doesn't need to hear, but maybe your local audience do. Maybe your town or your city, or maybe even your team need to hear that story. So the podcast doesn't necessarily need to be outward reaching to guests or to audiences. It could also be local. You could do a local podcast for your team, for your brokerages, for your offices. Just like we're doing here, we could easily turn this into a podcast that we could go back and listen to. So there's lots of options for podcasts and lots of different structures.
Matt, I think what's that there's a lot of inauthenticity in this world. And so when you actually listen to a podcast where someone's being authentic and real and just talking about the ugly, the difficult, the hard, and, human beings are able to, receive information through stories a lot easier than just, data, right? And so I think, especially when you have emotion when that's attached to it, that's when it becomes a compelling thing for people to resonate with. And so I love that you're focusing on that, and making that a priority, right? Like if there's no story, then there's nothing compelling for people to want to listen to. And so, yeah, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah. And think about this, guys. As I was just talking, and I'm thinking about compelling stories. Could you imagine if you had clients that were first-time home buyers, just had a newborn baby, had worked their ass off to build up their credit score to buy their first house, and they did it? Could you imagine bringing those guests onto your podcast and having them share their story, the ups and downs, the savings, the happiness of finding the house, and that entire package, and bring that energy to a podcast that maybe another couple of first-time home buyers hear and go, oh my God, they're just like us. We have a newborn. We've just got pre-qualified. These guys seem really happy. I'm going to go call Brian because he was their realtor. You got to bring that energy. It also, You could also bring on a client that had a really shitty deal. I thought we could sell our house for X. The market beat us up and we only sold it for Y. We lost money, blah, 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 blah. Bring that on. It doesn't have to be pretty. Honestly, the podcasts that get the most views, and I know it's because we all, like, if there's a crash on the freeway, we all slow down and look, right? But trauma sells, and people like to listen to trauma. They can connect with that. They can resonate with that because a lot of people have a lot of trauma. So think about the things you want to talk about in your podcast. It doesn't always have to be sunshine and rainbows. Bring out some of the ugly too. Just with our businesses, branding, I know I touched on this earlier, it has to be specific and it has to be coherent through all of your business. If you're tying your podcast into your real estate business, obviously you want to keep logos and colors the same, so make it cohesive. Or like me, if I've got a podcast that is completely separate, it's got no color themes, it's called The Bear Den, it's got nothing to do with real estate. The only connectivity is it's run by the Brit Bear. That's it. But whatever you choose, be cohesive. All right, so who wants to get into setup and actually doing this? We've talked about the reasons why, we've talked about some of the things to think about getting into, but as we're rocking and rolling, actually we're not rocking and rolling, we've got 3 minutes. So, shit me. Do it. No, we have another 30, right?
It's usually 30 to 45 minutes. So
Okay. All right. Give me 10 more minutes, guys. We're going to wrap this up. Trust me, because there's not a lot to talk about. So setting up your equipment. Let's talk about this. So I had a choice to make. I could have spent thousands of dollars to buy all my own equipment and set up either a studio in my home or rent an office and set up a studio. And realistically, it's one of those things. I didn't know how long I was going to do this. Was it going to be a 6-7 episoder and be $10,000 into equipment? Or was it going to be 400 plus episodes? And I wish I bought this years ago. What I decided was best for me, I found that, again, my very good friend in Utah, he has a podcast studio. He has 4 studios, fully equipped, cameras, equipment, the whole deal. I literally rock up, I talk, they record, they video, they edit everything, they post it for me. I literally fly up, record, fly home, done. Now, there's not many of those facilities around. Okay, there's a really shitty facility here in Tucson where you have to bring your own laptop and bring your own equipment. I'm out. Okay, so you really want to think about how are you really committed to this? You've got to go all in. If you're going to buy the equipment, you've got to go all in. You've got to play hard with this one. If not, for instance, if you are a brokerage, maybe you want to convert one of your offices into a podcast studio. Maybe that $10,000 worth of equipment is worth it, and you can then rent that out to other team members to record podcasts for themselves. I decided to go the other route and have somebody else take the legwork. That being said, I've been doing this 6 months. I'm going to Utah once a month. I'm banging out 5 to 6 episodes a day. So that's why my episodes, you'll see me all wearing the same shirt, the same hat in a lot of them, because they're all recorded in one day. I should actually take different shirts, but I can't be bothered. I'm now looking at building my own studio. I'm looking at building a studio down here in Tucson with 3 to 4 spaces, just like they have up in Salt Lake City, and letting other agents and realtors or anybody who wants to podcast rent from my space. So that may be something you want to do in your area. It's costly. There is a lot of back-end stuff to this. What I would highly, highly suggest to anybody that gets into this, and I have contacts for you, which I'm more than happy to share, the way that you get from podcast from your mind to the listener's ears, there is not only the recording and the editing, but then there's software that you have to use. The one that we use is called Spreaker. It's like speaker, but with an R in the middle. Spreaker, Spreaker. What that platform does is you upload your audio to that platform, and then you select which platforms you want to post it to. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, freaking Reddit, whatever. You select the things, you say when you want it to send it, and it uploads it for you. Now, you have to have accounts with Spotify, with Apple, and all these other ones too. But Spreaker is almost like a Hootsuite or a, what's the social media platforms that kind of manage everything for you? That's kind of what Spreaker is for podcasts, okay? So that's where my team upload all of my imagery, my audio, and then from there it goes out to Apple. The team edit the video for me, and they send me down my full 1 hour video, which has been edited. no captions, just an edited video. And then this, my friends, do this in real estate. Screw just podcasts, just do this in life. Use the AI platform opus.ai. If you have any lengthy videos, here's what I do. I upload my 50-minute video to my YouTube channel and let it upload. And then once it's uploaded, I take that link, post it into opus.ai. And then opus.ai, I can choose 30 to 60, 60 to 90, or 90 plus second reels. And I hit click, and it makes 10 to 15 reels for me in whatever time frame I wanted, with captions and emojis, and then ranks them for you which one to use first because of the hooks and the triggers and the language in the reel. $20 a month. If that isn't worth a little Bobby Dazzler top pocket find right on this goddamn podcast, that's the one. I'm not even joking. When I came across this, it's $20 a month and it gives you 200 minutes. So if you're just doing 10, 15-minute videos, it's perfect. I'll play with it. You can choose the settings of what color you want your captions, where you want them placed on the video. Do you want a logo in the corner? You can play with all that. And then boom, it just makes the video for you, sends you an email. You open the email, there's your videos, download and send. You can even post directly from there to social media if you wish. If the videos aren't trimmed correctly, you can also trim them a little bit as well, either way, left or right, and then download it. It's the easiest way of creating reels, my friends. All my podcast reels are all done through AI. So there's a money saver for you. Any quick questions? I know we're rattling through, and I want to keep you all guys on time and back to prospecting. So any questions?
Hey, Matt, it's Matt Farnham here. Great job, man. This is super helpful. Hey, well, I was just telling some friends the other day that, like, even right now, what you're doing right now, you could have your cell phone just slightly below your webcam up there where you're framed in perfectly vertically, and you just got 30 minutes of incredible content to throw into Opus. So you just got probably eight reels posted just from doing this for us. Yeah, hopefully if my broker's not an asshole, he'll send me the live recording and I can do that. That'd be great. Thank you. No, you're absolutely right, guys. Matt, I just saw your message here with Opus. It is a game changer. And honestly, I think so many people are sleeping on this. The fact that it's $20 a month for 200 minutes, like, get the hell out of here. This should be hundreds of dollars for the amount of time it'll save you. So I'll leave you with this lasting thought, okay? To kind of wrap up podcasting. Get out of your own head. It's just like prospecting, right? We don't pick up the phone because we're afraid they're going to say no. We don't pick up the phone because we're afraid we're going to get yelled at. It's the same with podcasting. There are people out there that you don't know yet that are waiting to hear your story and the story of your guests. Stop doing a disservice to people that you know that you love in your city or your state by not sharing the value that you have inside of you and that your guests have inside of you. If it's worth $1,200 a month to provide value once a week to just one person changes their life, it's worth $1,200. So don't overthink it. You already know in the back of your minds what you want to do real estate around. Start mapping it out. You have my number. You can text or call me. I'll happily do on a FaceTime with you and go dive deeper on this. But if you really want to make change and make a difference, then let's start today. All right, my friends?
Matt, I got a couple more questions for you. Like, yeah. I don't want to spend $10,000 for this equipment yet. And I don't have the luxury of flying to Salt Lake or wherever to like do these podcasts. Can I just be janky and like get my phone and, do it that way? Or do you think that's like not?
No. So I'm actually so a couple of things, my guys. I'm actually in communication with a business partner to opening a studio in St. George, Nazar. A two studio podcast studio in St. George. So we should talk about that. And then the other option is I'm in communication with Jimmy Rex and his organization over at Rookery Studios to see if you record your podcast on your laptop via a Zoom, could you then send that audio and video to a third party who will do what they do and post it for you? So I'm looking at other options and maybe doing an outsourced service that you send your stuff to a third party service. They'll edit it, they'll audio it, they'll post it for you, and then all you got to do is just record on your laptop. One last thing before I go, and this circles actually into what I was saying. I've got guests who are out of state, out of country that want to do podcasts with me. One thing that I came to mind was I'm actually buying, I don't know whether you guys have seen these, I'm sure you have. I've now bought 3 of these little microphones, the little stand-up microphones. They're actually Bluetooth. They're pretty cool. I actually have 3 of these, and I've bought 3 4K webcams. And if I have a guest, I will ship this plus the webcam with a self-addressed label to them. They plug it into their laptop. I have quality audio. I have 4K footage. And once they're done, they stick it in a box and send it back. The amount of people like, I would love to be on your podcast, but my laptop's shitty or I don't have good headphones. Don't worry, sweet cheeks. I've got you covered. It's in the mail. So just a food for thought if you're doing podcasts with people out of state, out of country. But yes, you can absolutely record on your phone or your laptop. And then quite honestly, you could go on Fiverr and find somebody that does video editing and audio and just say, hey, I'm doing a podcast. I've recorded this. Here's the audio. Can you make it pretty and send it me back? You could probably find that on Fiverr for about $25 to $30, maybe $50 a gig. So yes, Matty Farnham, I will post in the 5 leadership text. I will post the links for those and also the 4K cameras for you all. Okay. All right, my friends, any other questions?
Matt, thank you so much for being on here and sharing this information with us. I think it's important for people to this. Even for me, it seems a little overwhelming. Just FYI, these masterclasses are made into podcasts. We do have a podcast of all these masterclasses that people can go back and listen to. I think the audio is good. The video is not as great, but obviously podcasts don't have video. But I think it's even as overwhelming as it might seem, or as you might be sitting in the seat that you are today, might think, oh, I don't have the voice for audio or for podcasts. I'm not compelling enough, or whatever it is. Like, those are all just limiting beliefs that every single one of you may have. And I believe that there's always someone that's willing to listen to you, and that's your tribe, right? I think it's important to be able to realize that people out there need to know that you exist. And if you don't put yourself out there and be vulnerable enough to do so, then you don't exist. And so I just invite you to be willing to do that. Be willing to step out of your comfort zone, and even if you don't do it for yourself, do it for people that need to hear your story or need to hear you and how you're able to orchestrate, telling those stories that are out there.
Guys, it's also a really great way, quite honestly, if you're doing it as a real estate podcast, it's actually a really great way to introduce new agents on your team to your entire database. If you sent a link out to your entire database of this week's new episode, and it's like, hey, this week's new episode is introducing our buyer specialist, Dave. It's a great way of introducing people of your team to your database. They already know and like you. They'll probably give a 10 or 15 minute podcast to listen to support you. It's a great way to show what you're doing in the community. It really is a great and powerful tool. And like Nazar said, it lasts a lifetime. So, guys, thank you, my friends. I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to chat about something that obviously I'm very passionate about. I've just set up my podcasting for next week in Utah. So this is perfect. If you have any questions, please text, call, or email me. I'm more than happy to chat it up, and I will get you the links for the microphones and the webcams in the chat.
That'd be awesome. Thank you so much. All right, guys.
All right, guys. Have a great one.